The orphanage hall was steeped in an uneasy calm. The distant rustling of trees swaying in the wind was the only sound that echoed beyond the worn, time-worn walls. At the center of the room stood a man in a pristine suit, his shoes gleaming like polished mirrors, surveying the space around him. He cut an imposing figure, exuding confidence and power with his posture, yet there was something in his eyes that betrayed his outward assurance. Those deep brown eyes, burdened by memories he never shared, scanned every detail with precision: the neatly arranged chairs, the faded curtains, the subtle cracks in the floorboards. "Mr. Miguel, this way, please," said the orphanage director, a middle-aged woman whose kind yet weary smile softened her otherwise brisk manner. She led the way with quickened steps, buoyed by the promise of a generous benefactor's visit. As they walked through narrow corridors adorned with children's drawings, Miguel couldn't help but notice the furtive glances from little faces peeking out behind half-closed doors. Some waved shyly, others darted back into the shadows, retreating from view. He attempted a smile, though the gesture felt out of place on his usually reserved face. And then it happened. The moment they entered the dining hall, a high-pitched voice cut through the air. "I know you." The sharp cry came from a little girl, halting every conversation in the room. All eyes turned to her, including Miguel's, who froze in his tracks. She was about 8 years old, slight and petite for her age, with large brown eyes that burned with intensity. Her chestnut hair framed a face filled with curiosity and, at that moment, an almost unsettling conviction. She rushed forward, pointing at him with a trembling finger, her chest heaving as though she'd made some monumental discovery. "I know you," she repeated, her voice carrying a mix of exhilaration and desperation. Miguel felt the world slow. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat a chaotic rhythm that seemed to reverberate in his ears. It wasn't possible. He'd never been here before. He had no idea who this child was. But deep down, something stirred, a faint echo, a half-forgotten memory, or perhaps the sheer gravity of the moment. He couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't mere coincidence. The director glanced at Miguel, her face puzzled, as if trying to make sense of the situation. Miguel, however, couldn't take his eyes off the girl, who now stood just steps away, her face alight with an unshakable certainty. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice raspier and softer than he'd intended. The girl's reply came in a whisper laden with emotion. "You're my dad." Miguel stood rooted to the spot. The girl's words reverberated in his mind, mingling with a whirlwind of chaotic thoughts. "You're my dad." It didn't make sense. It couldn't. Could it? He struggled to regain composure, adjusting his tie with hands that suddenly felt far too heavy. "This doesn't make any sense," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Sensing the awkward tension, the director stepped in. "Sophia, sweetheart, you're probably mistaken. Mr. Miguel is here to help us, but..." "I'm not mistaken," Sophia interrupted, her young voice carrying a startling resolve. "I remember him." Miguel opened his mouth to protest, but hesitated. The intensity in the girl's gaze left him disarmed. He crouched down to her level, meeting her eyes directly. "Sophia, is that your name?" She nodded. "I've never been here before. You must be confusing me with someone else." "No," she insisted, gripping his hand. "You've been with me, in a dream." That simple statement, spoken with such quiet conviction, sent a shiver through him. A dream? Miguel wasn't a man prone to fanciful thinking or belief in the mystical. His life's success had been built on logic, strategy, and hard work, no room for coincidence or imagination. Yet here he was, unable to look away from this child who claimed to know him from a place beyond reality. The director cleared her throat, trying to restore a sense of normalcy to the situation. "Why don't we continue with the tour, Mr. Miguel? Sophia, you can go back to the activity room with the other children." But Sophia didn't let go of his hand. "You promised you'd come back," she said, her voice now laced with sadness. "I've waited so long." Miguel felt a pang in his chest, a familiar ache, as if something long buried was struggling to resurface. He glanced at the director and gave a slow nod. "Let her stay. I want to understand what's going on." Miguel and Sophia were guided to a small room adjoining the dining hall. It was modestly furnished, with old chairs and a faintly sweet aroma of biscuits, likely baked earlier in the day. The director, reluctant to leave them alone, lingered near the door, while Sophia perched on a chair, her small legs swinging in the air. Miguel took the seat opposite her, trying to piece together the right words. He was a man accustomed to tense negotiations and high-stakes meetings with formidable opponents. Yet nothing had prepared him for this, a conversation with a child who seemed certain she was linked to a part of his life he couldn't recall. "Sophia," he began gently, his voice calm and measured, "can you explain what you meant earlier? About knowing me?" The girl clasped her hands in her lap, as if summoning courage. "I've had dreams about you for as long as I can remember, but they are not like other dreams. It's always the same, I'm in a place full of light, and you're there. You smile at me and say you'll come for me. That one day you'll take me home." Miguel tried to keep his expression neutral, but her words hit him like a blow. He didn't have children. He'd never even entertained the thought of having any. So why did she sound so certain? "I've never promised that to anyone, Sophia. I think you must be mistaken." "I'm not." Her insistence startled him. "It's you. I'd know you anywhere. I always knew you'd come." A heavy silence settled between them. Miguel felt the weight of the moment grow, as though something far larger than himself was unfolding in front of his eyes. Before he could find a response, Sophia spoke again. "When I was younger, I thought you were an angel," she said, her gaze fixed on her hands. "But later, I realized you were a real person. And then, you disappeared." "Disappeared?" Miguel echoed, his brow furrowing. "Yes. In the dream, you always vanish into the light." Her description sent a chill through him, deep in the recesses of his mind. He'd never set foot in this orphanage before, but her story triggered something, a flicker of fragmented, distant memories, like a face half seen through a thick fog. "I don't know what you've seen, Sophia, but I'm not who you think I am." His voice had hardened, as though trying to push back against his own uncertainties. "You don't believe me," she murmured, her gaze dropping to the floor. "It's not about belief. It's just, it doesn't make sense." The director stepped closer, sensing the rising tension. "Mr. Miguel, the children here sometimes create stories to help them cope with difficult situations. Sophia might be projecting something she deeply wishes for onto you. This isn't a story." Sophia protested, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Miguel exhaled deeply, running a hand through his hair. "I'm not saying you're lying, Sophia. I don't know how to explain this." He glanced at the director, silently asking for guidance, but her expression was merely one of pity. Something within him told him he couldn't just walk away from this, not now. "Can I ask you something, Sophia?" She nodded, her wide eyes locked on his. "Have you ever told anyone else about this dream?" "No," she said quickly. No one would believe me. But when I saw you, I knew it was the right time. There was an honesty in her words that disarmed him completely. Miguel felt as though he were staring at an incomplete puzzle, its pieces scattered across the years. He decided to press further. Sophia, tell me, is there something in the dream you never forget? Something specific? She paused, her small face scrunching in concentration. Then, with a clarity that sent a shiver down his spine, she answered. You're always holding a small box. There's something shiny inside it. I can never see what it is, but you tell me it's important. And that you'll give it to me when I'm older. Miguel's heart began to race. He didn't want to acknowledge it, but her words had stirred a long-buried memory. Something from years ago, something he had deliberately pushed away. Miguel felt his throat tighten as he listened. He leaned back in his chair, as though creating physical distance from the conversation might help him process the storm brewing in his mind. The image Sophia described, a small, gleaming box, had unearthed something real. Not a dream, but a memory. He couldn't yet fit the pieces together, but he knew he had to understand. The director broke the mounting silence. Mr. Miguel, if you'd like, we can end the visit for today. Sophia might be getting tired. No, his response came out firmer than he'd intended. Turning to Sophia, he softened his tone. Could you give me a moment, please? The director hesitated before nodding, gently guiding Sophia into the corridor. Alone at last, Miguel pressed his fingers to his temples, as though sheer willpower might bring some clarity. He was certain he'd never been to this orphanage before. Absolutely certain. And yet, the girl's description felt like more than a coincidence. For a fleeting moment, he wondered if this was some kind of ploy. After all, he was a wealthy businessman, a magnet for attention, wanted and unwanted alike. But Sophia was just a child. Her conviction felt too raw, too genuine to be fabricated. He stood and began pacing the room, his footsteps a muted echo against the wooden floor. Shards of memory began to surface, not of the box Sophia had mentioned, but of a time when he was younger, more vulnerable. He tried to push them away. It can't be, he muttered to himself. When the director returned with Sophia, the little girl clutched a worn doll tightly against her chest, as if seeking comfort. Miguel knelt again, determined to approach this from another angle. Sophia, he began gently, these dreams you've been having, did they start when you came to the orphanage? She shook her head. No. I've always had them. Ever since my mum left me here. Her words hit Miguel like a blow. He didn't know why, but there was a fragile thread connecting them, a thread he couldn't yet trace fully. Do you remember your mum? He asked, his voice softening further. A little, Sophia admitted. She had sad eyes. She said she didn't have a choice. Miguel swallowed hard. That phrase, didn't have a choice, echoed in a dark corner of his memory. He thought of his own childhood, something he rarely did. He'd grown up in humble circumstances, raised by a single mother who had worked tirelessly, sacrificing everything to give him a better life. But there were gaps in his story, voids he had never cared to fill. Do you know her name? Sophia hesitated, then whispered, Anna. The name struck Miguel like lightning. Anna. It was his own mother's name. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt, and he had to steady himself on the chair to keep from falling. He stared at Sophia, searching her small face for any trace of familiarity, any hint of recognition. Are you all right? The director asked, her voice tinged with concern as she noted his sudden pallor. Miguel struggled for words. I'm fine. I need to make a phone call. Before anyone could respond, he stepped out into the hallway, pulling his phone from his pocket. His assistant, ever prompt, answered on the second ring. Eduardo, I need you to dig up information on a woman named Anna. She may have some connection to this orphanage. Look for any records, donations, adoptions, anything. And see if you can find any details about a girl named Sophia. Of course, sir. Any other specifics? Miguel hesitated. No. Just be quick. He hung up and stood still in the corridor, staring at nothing. The pieces were there, scattered before him, but he couldn't yet see the full picture. The only certainty was that this child and his past were inexplicably linked, and he had to find out how. When Miguel returned to the room, his face was still taut with tension. He avoided Sophia's gaze at first, afraid she might see through him, might notice the turmoil he was trying to mask. He sat at the table again, lacing his fingers together on the surface. Sophia, I'm going to ask you a few more questions. Is that all right? She nodded, clutching her doll even tighter. You said your mother's name was Anna. Do you remember anything else about her? Something she told you, or something you can recall? The girl furrowed her brow, as though reaching for a memory just out of grasp. She used to sing to me, a song about stars. Miguel's breath caught. He didn't know why, but that small detail struck a chord deep within him. He could almost hear a faint melody in the back of his mind, like a half-forgotten lullaby. It was nothing concrete, just the ghost of something he hadn't thought about in years. But it was enough to make the air in the room feel heavier, more charged with meaning. Miguel's heart stopped for a moment. He knew that song. It was the same lullaby his mother used to sing to him when he was a child. The simple melody and the words about stars guiding travelers through the night sky were etched into his memory, though he hadn't heard it in decades. Do you remember the words? He asked, his voice low. Sophia began to hum softly, her voice delicate and hesitant. The stars in the sky, they shine to guide our way. One day you'll find your path, and you'll never cry again. Miguel turned his gaze away, feeling a tightness in his chest. He couldn't deny it any longer. The connection was real, though he still didn't understand how. My mother used to sing that to me too, he said, almost in a whisper. Sophia stopped humming, her eyes wide with surprise. So, you believe me? He hesitated before answering. I believe there's something here I need to figure out. The director, who had remained silent until now, took a step forward. Mr. Miguel, I understand this might be confusing, but there's likely a logical explanation. Sometimes children hear stories or piece together dreams that feel like memories. That doesn't explain how she knows this song. Miguel looked at the director, his voice steady but firm. This isn't a common tune. My mother wrote it when I was a child. No one else knew about it. The director blinked, clearly taken aback, but said nothing. There's something I need to check, Miguel continued. He turned to Sophia. Do you know where your mother is now? Sophia lowered her eyes, shaking her head. She left. She said I'd be safe here. She never came back. The room fell into a heavy silence. Miguel tried to process what he'd just heard. He felt like he was on the verge of uncovering a truth that would change everything, but it remained just out of reach. Sophia, do you have anything of your mother's? Something she left with you? The girl thought for a moment before nodding. Yes. She gave me a necklace before she left. She said it was special. Can I see it? Sophia hesitated, then slowly pulled a necklace from the pocket of her dress. It was a simple silver chain with a small star-shaped pendant. Miguel felt a chill run down his spine as he saw it. He recognized that necklace. It had belonged to his mother. He'd seen her wear it every day of his childhood. He reached out to take the pendant but stopped midway. He couldn't deny it any longer. Sophia was connected to his story, somehow, in ways he couldn't yet explain. How did she get this? He murmured, staring at the pendant as if it might hold the answers he was seeking. Sophia tilted her head, her expression puzzled. You know what it is, don't you? Miguel didn't reply. He simply looked at her, his eyes now filled with a mix of disbelief and emotion. The star-shaped pendant seemed to glow faintly in the dim light, as if it carried the weight of all the mysteries that now surrounded him. His hand trembled as he picked it up. It was impossible to deny. He remembered seeing it on his mother's neck during the most difficult times of his childhood. This necklace, he began, but his voice faltered. He took a deep breath and tried again. Sophia, did your mother say anything about it? Why she gave it to you? The girl hugged her doll tighter, as if drawing strength from it. She said it was to protect me. That it would keep me safe until you came back. Miguel felt his world tilt. Asterisk until you came back. Asterisk the words echoed in his chest like the faint memory of something he should have remembered but couldn't. His mother had never mentioned another child, never hinted at secrets hidden within their history. And yet, the necklace was here, in the hands of this girl who claimed to have seen him before, in a dream. Sophia, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Do you think your mother knew that I'd be here today? The girl shook her head. I don't know. But she always said it would happen when the time was right. That I shouldn't lose hope. He stood abruptly, leaving the necklace on the table. His hands flew to his hair, pulling it back in a gesture of frustration and confusion. It was too much, the impossible connections, the half-formed memories, and now the realization that something essential had been hidden from him all his life. Are you all right, Mr. Miguel? The director asked, stepping forward with a concerned expression. No, he replied, his tone sharper than he intended. No, I'm not. This doesn't make sense. It can't make sense. Sophia shrank back slightly in her chair, but her gaze didn't waver. Why are you angry? She asked, her voice small and uncertain. Miguel paused, feeling a pang of guilt for his reaction. I'm not angry at you, Sophia. I'm just angry at myself. He sat down again, trying to appear less intimidating. This necklace belonged to my mother. But I don't know how your mother got it. I don't know why you think I'm who you say I am. Because it's true, she said simply, as though it were the most obvious thing in the world. Miguel shook his head, exasperated. My mother never spoke of you. She never mentioned an Anna, or a necklace, or... He stopped, realizing his voice was rising again. He took a deep breath, lowering his tone. I just want to understand. Sophia watched him, her large, honest eyes fixed on his. Do you think she lied? Miguel didn't know how to answer. The mother he had known was a truthful woman, but she was also someone who had carried secrets, who had sacrificed everything for him without complaint. Could she really have hidden something this big? I don't know, he admitted at last. The director stepped in gently. Mr. Miguel, may I suggest something? Perhaps the orphanage's records have information about Sophia's mother. If Anna left anything behind besides this necklace, it might be in the archives. Miguel hesitated. Part of him wanted to refuse, afraid of what he might uncover. But another part of him, the part that had been rattled by everything so far, knew he needed answers. He turned to Sophia, pushing aside the growing sense that his life was about to change irrevocably. "Sophia, do you mind if I try to find out more about your mum?" She shook her head. "I just want to know the truth." As the director left to retrieve the records, Miguel remained silent, his eyes drifting back to the necklace on the table. Memories began to surface in fragmented pieces, his mother sewing by candlelight, her voice softly singing the same song Sophia had hummed earlier, and, strangely, a name he couldn't quite make out. It was a faint recollection, barely there, but it felt tied to all of this. When the director returned, she held a slim folder with the name, Anna, written on the cover. She placed it hesitantly on the table. "These are the only papers we have. It's not much, but it might help." Miguel opened the folder with trembling hands. The first document was a simple intake form, detailing when Sophia had been left at the orphanage. He skimmed through it quickly but froze when he reached the notes section. Asterisk, the child's mother, Anna, mentioned that the girl should be cared for until a man named Miguel came to find her. She said he would know what to do. Asterisk. Miguel felt as if the ground beneath him had vanished. The director watched him carefully, but he couldn't speak. He simply stood there, staring at the words as though they were an impossible puzzle. He looked at Sophia, who sat patiently, her small frame almost dwarfed by the weight of everything around her. "Did you know this?" She shook her head. "No. I just knew you'd come." Miguel stood abruptly, pacing the room, his heart pounding. This was beyond anything he could make sense of. How could his mother, who had been gone for years, be connected to Sophia? Who was Anna? And why did fate seem to have dragged him to this orphanage at this precise moment? He stopped by the window, staring out at the grey sky as if the answers might be hidden among the clouds. The folder in his hand felt impossibly heavy. He knew the connections between himself, Sophia, and Anna were real, but they were shrouded in a fog he couldn't clear. Turning back to Sophia, who was still seated with her doll resting on her lap, he spoke softly. "I need your help, Sophia. I want to understand how you and I are connected." "I only know what my mum told me in my dreams," she said timidly. "And what I felt when I looked at the necklace. It was like it was telling me to wait for you." Miguel felt the weight of her words settle over him. His eyes drifted again to the necklace, the small star pendant lying on the table as if it were the key to everything. He remembered something his mother used to say, that the star held a special meaning. "Did your mum ever tell you why the necklace was important?" he asked. "She said it was from my dad, and that one day he'd know what to do with it." Her words hit Miguel like a thunderclap. It was as if the pieces of a puzzle were beginning to slot into place, but agonizingly slowly. He picked up the necklace, turning it over in his fingers, and then noticed something he hadn't seen before, a faint engraving on the back of the pendant, so small it was almost invisible. Frowning, he held the pendant up to the light. The letters were tiny but legible, asterisk, forever guided by the stars. Asterisk. Miguel froze. He had seen those words before. They were written on an old photograph his mother had kept in a box of memories. It was an image of her as a young woman, standing beside a man Miguel had never known. "Do you know what it means?" Sophia's voice cut through Miguel's swirling thoughts. He sat back down, trying to steady himself. My mother had a photograph with those words. It was something very special to her. Sophia tilted her head, curiosity lighting up her face. Do you think she knew my mum? Miguel hesitated, the question lingering in the air. I don't know, Sophia. But I think she might have. The director, who had been silently observing the exchange, finally stepped in. Mr. Miguel, if you'll allow me, I can help investigate this connection. There are older records in the orphanage that might give us more information about Sophia's mother. We might find something useful. Miguel nodded. Please. This is important. As the director left the room again, Miguel turned his attention back to Sophia. I need you to tell me the truth, Sophia. When you look at me, do you feel anything? Like you know me from somewhere? The girl thought for a moment, her large, bright eyes fixed on him. Yes. I don't know how to explain it, but it's like you're part of me. Even before I saw you, I knew what you looked like. Miguel felt his stomach twist. Sophia's conviction was unshakable, and deep down, he knew she wasn't wrong. He just needed solid answers, something tangible to piece together this overwhelming puzzle. When the director returned, she held a bundle of yellowed papers in her hands. I found something, she said, placing the documents on the table. These are records that mention Anna before she brought Sophia here. It looks like she worked as a housemaid for several years in different homes. Miguel picked up the papers, quickly skimming through them. He stopped abruptly, his heart racing. There, on the last page, was an address tied to one of the houses where Anna had worked. It was immediately familiar. This can't be, he said, his voice barely audible. You recognize the address? The director asked. Yes, Miguel replied, still in shock. It's the house where my mother worked before I was born. Miguel didn't waste a moment. He rose from his chair with a resolve that startled both the director and Sophia. The address wasn't just a coincidence, it was a link between his past and the mystery that had been haunting him since he first met Sophia. I need to visit this place, he said, clutching the document tightly. The director hesitated. Mr. Miguel, wouldn't it be better to go through these records more carefully? There might be other details we've overlooked. No, he said firmly. Whatever this is, the answer is there. I need to see it for myself. Sophia watched him intently, her brow furrowed. Are you going on your own? He stopped, turning to look at her. Something inside him knew leaving her behind would be a mistake. Do you want to come with me? She nodded immediately, standing from her chair and clutching her doll tightly to her chest. The director started to protest. Mr. Miguel, this might be too much for Sophia. Perhaps it would be better if... She has as much right to these answers as I do, he interrupted, already moving toward the door. And maybe she'll see something I can't. The drive to the address was filled with a tense silence. Miguel kept his focus on the road, his thoughts a whirlwind of memories and questions. Sophia sat in the passenger seat, gazing out the window, her expression a mixture of curiosity and quiet determination. It felt as though both of them knew they were on the brink of uncovering something irreversible. When they arrived, Miguel parked in front of the house, which seemed almost untouched by time. It was an old brick building with a neglected garden overrun by weeds. The sight of it hit him like a wave of nostalgia. He had spent parts of his childhood waiting outside that very house, watching his mother finish her shifts as a maid. This is it, he said, more to himself than to Sophia. They stepped out of the car and walked to the front door. Miguel felt a shiver run through him as he placed his hand on the rusty doorknob, but before he could turn it, the door opened from the inside. An elderly woman stood in the doorway, her graying hair pulled back, her sharp eyes scanning them with a hint of suspicion. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone guarded. "I'm Miguel," he said, trying to keep his voice respectful. "My mother, Laura, worked here many years ago. I need to ask you some questions about her and about a woman named Anna." The woman's eyes widened at the mention of the names. "Laura and Anna? You're Laura's son?" Miguel nodded, his heart pounding. The woman hesitated for a moment before stepping aside to open the door wider. "Come in. There's much you need to know." Today, we follow the journey of Miguel and Sofia, two lives separated by secrets and time, but connected by an unbreakable bond. What began as an innocent visit to an orphanage uncovered a story of love, sacrifice, and hope that has transcended generations. Miguel, a man used to controlling everything around him, was challenged to face the truths of his past and embrace a future he never imagined, that of becoming a father. Sofia, with her unwavering courage and faith, showed us that even in the darkest moments, hope can be a guiding light, like a star that never stops shining. Together, they taught us that family ties are formed not just by blood, but by choice and unconditional love. If this story touched your heart, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like, and share it with anyone who could do with a dose of emotion and inspiration. Don't forget to hit the bell so you won't miss our upcoming stories, each one bringing lessons that transform us and connect us to the most human parts of ourselves. Thank you so much for joining us today. Check out the next video that's popping up on the screen now, and get ready for another narrative full of emotion and meaning. See you there.